My name is Michelle Forcier, and I have a medical degree from University of Connecticut, residency, University of Utah Pediatrics, and I've worked for a number of different Planned Parenthoods for 20 years. I do advanced contraception and abortion, as well as gender hormones, and sort of looking at the whole sort of schema of gender, sex, and reproductive justice.
So you've done a lot of work in this field. Could you just start by telling us?
Sure.
At what age can a child first begin to transition into another gender or identify themselves as a gender different from how they were born?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's research and data that show that babies and infants understand differences in gender. Some children figure out their gender really early, and the reason why we say, oh, that's interesting or important is because they're figuring out their gender identity is not necessarily congruent with their sex assigned at birth.
When the doctor sees the penis and says, this is a male, has the sex of male, that's an arbitrary distinction.
Telling that family, based on that little penis, that your child is absolutely 100% male identified, no matter what else occurs in their life, that's not correct.
So what is gender affirmation care? You're a big proponent of. If we walk through, a child is sitting down with you, is questioning their gender. What's the gender affirmation process?
Affirmation means that as a pediatrician, as someone who says my job is to provide the best medical care for you, is I need to listen really carefully. And how I put it in words for kids so that they can understand it is, tell me your story. Where have you been in terms of your gender and your gender identity? Where are you right now? And more excitingly, where would you like to be in the future?
Have you ever met a 4-year-old who believes in Santa Claus?
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot of information that I'm throwing at you. By the way, this is the Ryan Mack Show with your host, Ryan McKenzie. And that was Matt Walsh during the part of his documentary with a pediatrician who is a gender-affirming pediatrician. And that short clip there, it was her reference to the fact that kids actually can know their gender from birth and as young as babies. I'm here to tell you that that is not accurate at all. It is science-based, not societal-based. And that's what today's episode is going to be on. I am doing my own version of What is a Woman, and I have a very special guest with me today. You might all know her, but I'll get to that in a minute. So what is a woman? Well, obviously I'm a man, so I have no idea what a woman is. I'm not a biologist, but the left wants you to think that being a woman is something just as simple as identifying based on how you think and feel. So someday I might decide I want to be a woman just based on how I feel in my mind. Well, that's utter nonsense, and we're going to discuss that today, along with getting the opinion from my special guest on what she believes is a woman. Because after all, she's no biologist, but she is in fact a woman last time I checked. Also, an article that I came across from the publicdiscourse.com, and this is going to debunk the theory that the pediatrician says that gender is malleable and can be changed on a whim. Quote, modern science shows us that sexual organization begins with our DNA in development in the womb, and that our sex differences manifest themselves in many bodily systems and organs, all the way down to the molecular level. In other words, our physical organization for one of two functions in reproduction shapes us organically from the beginning of life at every level of our being. So there's this thing called hormones, XX and XY, that's our chromosomes, and we have separate chromosomes for male and female. The left wants you to believe that you can pretend to be anything you want, and that's not the case. So I would like to bring in my very special guest. She is my wife, and I, for a fact, know that she is a woman. Amanda, how are you?
I'm doing well this evening, thanks. How are you?
Fantastic. All right, so you heard the clip there. We've seen the documentary, right? What did you think what was your take on Matt Walsh's ability to stay calm and collected during the entire documentary with all these people that he interviewed?
Truthfully, I couldn't really keep a straight face when he was doing it because, we all know that what she's saying is complete crap. But I was surprised that he was even able to keep a straight face. But, I agreed with everything he was saying. I thought that his comments and his questions were very direct. And I also felt that she kind of skirted around some of the questions because she really didn't have a good, logical, definitive answer for him, which I found even more humorous.
Yeah, it's funny that the left tries to argue a point based on emotions and not fact-based. So, obviously, I'm not going to interview every leftist out there who disagrees with me, so this is somewhat biased because I have an opinion already on this topic, and I believe wholeheartedly, not just science-based, but also biblically, we were created two different creatures, man and woman. You were made from Adam's rib, and God created man and woman to be equal but complementary in their design. So, despite what the left says, that we can all be unicorns and furries, and that gender can be decided at any age, what is your take specifically? How does that make you feel when they sit there and say, well, a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man?
I find that very disrespectful. But, because we as Christians know that as women, God created women to be the helpmeet of our husbands, of the man. And if we're going around, or if society's going around trying to say that, well, I don't really feel like a man, or I don't really feel like a woman, so I'm going to try to do everything I can to change that, and that's kind of a slap in the face to God, because when you're conceived, he already has your story written out for you as said gender, as said sex that you were, created to be. And if you go and try to change that, that's just disrespectful to him. And quite frankly, I don't get it.
Yeah, I agree. There's limits on the argument and the conversation. So, can I be a woman?
No.
Why?
A couple of reasons. What you just said earlier about it's being in our DNA, and based off of a molecular level, you can change all the hormones that you want. You can change the appearance of your genitalia, all of that. But ultimately, it comes down to you just trying to convince yourself that you're something that you're not. And that stems back to the mental illness problem that our society has currently. And I can only pray that gets better, but to answer your question, no. God created you to be a man or a woman from birth, and that is how you will forever be. It doesn't matter what you do to alter your appearance. It is just that. You are altering the appearance and nothing further.
Well, what if I feel like I am a woman trapped in a man's body? Is that a thing?
Yeah, you can feel that, but that doesn't mean that you can, just because you feel that way, doesn't mean that you can make yourself,
Right, so it's not a physical thing that can happen, right?
No.
So it's all in the mind as far as feelings and thoughts.
Right, altering your appearance for it or whatnot is only, I guess, a temporary solution for the individual who feels a different sex than they originally are. It's not a complete sex change. It's just you're trying to incorporate your feelings with how you look, and it doesn't work that way.
Right. So in your short-lived experiences as a parent, as a wife, and your 30 some odd years on this planet Earth as a woman, what is a specific role that would differentiate a woman from being a man?
The largest one being that females of any species are the only ones that can give birth. Men cannot do that.
But the left says they can, and that you're a bigot, and that you're a racist, and you're sexist, and you're just hateful.
Yeah, the left says a lot of stuff, but they're just throwing around words that they really don't understand. They're trying to redefine words and terms to make us, think and feel a different way. That's also another problem. The mass media is trying to tell us how to think and feel, and none of that's correct. None of it's true, because we're not basing it off of fact. You're just basing it off of feelings, and that's not how it goes.
Right. So I want to get to this quote by a philosopher, Robert George, on the basis of the physical appearances between men and women, and that he believes that it's virtually impossible to change physically. Changing sexes is a metaphysical impossibility because it is a biological impossibility. So, men have larger hearts and lungs. Women have larger livers, stomachs, thyroid glands, and kidneys than men. Women have lower blood pressure on average and a faster heartbeat. Men have more lean mass and women have more fat mass. Women are born with ovaries that produce eggs which can be fertilized. The fertilized egg attaches to the inside of the woman's womb, uterus, and develops into a baby. Women have the XX chromosomes, males have the XY. A woman produces estrogen and progesterone, and men produce testosterone. So those are just some of the hormonal differences between men and women. Now there are rarities that I will say that do happen with genetics. You can get an extra chromosome in there, stuck in there, and you can technically be both male and female on one level, but you're generally going to physically develop one way or the other and just have some anomaly in your genes. So on your level, how offensive is it to women when they've had a progress since the women's suffrage movement with voting rights and all the progress the feminism movement made up until now, where you have men competing in women's sports with the physical differences, men being a lot faster, stronger, and bigger than women? It's almost an unfair advantage in those cases.
Almost?
Yeah. Because I'm not a very big guy, but I'd like to think that I have some advantage in a race against you if I did race you.
Because you're built differently than I am. You're meant to do things better than I am on certain levels.
Right. But back to your point about the differences between men and women overall, and the backslide of the gender movement, because women used to get the shaft on a lot of public things. They had to be forced to stay home. They weren't allowed to be in the draft or military because they were helping in the home. That is traditional values that I think is lost on America today.
I agree.
Because the difference between the two roles. Now they want to make everything so equal where men and women have to do certain things that their gender roles specifically weren't, really set out to do in the beginning. So I think it's interesting that we have part of our society thinks that you can be anything you want, and you can be a man, you can be a woman, you can be a furry, but I would think as a woman it would be really offensive to the women movement of all these things that you've progressed on over the years to be taking a back seat to people who are mentally ill, thinking they can just change their gender on a dime.
I agree.
Personally, how have you taken to some of the issues we've seen with this movement? Because this article was written that I talked about 2018, so obviously it's been around an issue a lot longer than just a couple years. What is your take on a whole? How does this set women back?
It sets us back a lot. I mean, we fought really hard to get the rights that we currently have, and don't get me wrong, I am all for equality. However, there are limitations with that word. As stated in the Bible, men were made to be built differently and to be permitted to allow to do be able to do things that women were not really supposed to be doing, or they're not, can't do it as well as men can. Excuse me. So when people try to say that they want to change from being a woman to a man, it's not just offensive, but you're backsliding on all the history that men and women have actually made up to this point. I mean, especially women, because we fought so hard to get the rights. And like I said, I'm all for equality. I mean, I want to be able to have the same rights as men, but that doesn't mean I want to be a man. I know that I have limitations that I have, and that just they are. They are the way they are. God didn't make me to be able to lift a lot of things or be able to have all the strength that men do, and that's normal. That's how it's supposed to be. But I just generally I feel like it's just a huge backslide, and I agree with what you've been saying. I don't know. It's a part of me it's common sense has taken a serious hiatus from.
Well, I think it goes back to gender and sex. They're interchangeable as far as how we are supposed to use those terms. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to that when you're male and female, you're man and woman. That's how the sex and gender, they try to twist it and say, well, your assigned sex at birth is different than your gender, how you feel, and that's not true either. They call it, well, that's not true. The doctor shouldn't be able to assign a gender to you as a baby, even though you may feel something later on in life. And that's whole ideology, this whole leftist breakdown of the gender role is insane, and I think it leads to a godless culture overall. Now, I'm not saying you have to believe in God in order to know that there's men and women, but it leads to a whole nother slippery slope or loophole that you don't want to go down when you start thinking that we can just pretend to be whatever we want.
Right. And two of the things that I heard at the start of this, what was her name again? I apologize.
Michelle.
Yes. Her.
Forcier, I think that's how you pronounced it. Yeah.
Yes. Two things that she said was just completely outrageous. She said that, when a baby is born and the baby is male, and you can see that by, having the male genitalia, that you can't assign that baby as male or female simply based off of that, which is ridiculous. Because women can't have a penis. Men can't have a vagina when they're born. Your sex is determined by, let's see, I believe it was week 11 in pregnancy when the baby's genitalia starts to develop, and by week 16, so around 4 months, the reproductive organs are fully developed. So for her to say that, when the baby comes out or when it's born, the doctor can't go ahead and say, oh, okay, well, since it has a penis, it's a male, or if it has a vagina, it's a female. She's saying that that's wrong is completely outrageous.
Yeah, I feel like that would be the first sign of noticing a male or female from birth.
Like, you think?
That's the basic description we differentiate people. An example of how crooked and how corrupt the left is. I heard more about the Colorado shooter, the non-binary supposed guy. Yeah. Well, there was a trans woman who was a male pretending to be a woman. She had an argument on the shooter because she gendered him as a male because he looked like a male and that it wasn't really a non-binary individual. And when I was listening to the MVR show and the guys were talking about it, and they were mocking the idea that the left already has this idea that you can't gender that person. But here we are, you have a trans gendered individual gendering a person who says they're non-binary. So they literally just ate their own because they said that they already gendered this person. This whole craziness with gender and sex and assigned identity it's getting out of hand, and I'm glad Matt Walsh had the documentary. And if I were him, I would have yelled, I would have laughed. It would have really been hard for me to keep my composure asking all these people those specific questions that he did without going nuts. I don't know how I would have been able to handle myself.
No, I would have been rude, and I would have been overly sarcastic, and it just wouldn't have gone well.
It's insane. Now, one other question I had, this just came to me because we are talking about the way she talked about gender identity and affirmation. You know, she described and talked about what affirmation was, gender affirm. So as a pediatrician, she described her role as if someone comes to her and feels they're a boy or girl, she's literally just going to say, yeah, you are. That's not really a pediatrician's role to affirm care. But also the other thing with that, what are your thoughts on affirmation care, if you know much about it, from what she described, and the mutilation surgeries and hormone blocking treatments, all the different things that are out there that are designed to stop the normal process of a body developing? What are your thoughts on those?
Well, cosmetic surgery and cross-sex hormones, they cannot change us into the opposite sex. It only affects appearances. So when she also made the comment, not to get off on a tangent here, about how a baby can determine whether or not it's a male or a female, how ridiculous is that? When you're a baby, you can't do much of anything.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was drooling or vomiting or pooping at some level before I actually knew who or what I was. Right. I don't really know. It's like the thing he describes. Kids at 4 think that Santa Claus still exists. So are we really supposed to think that they can know what gender they are at 4?
No.
If they don't know
they
that
don't have the mental
Easter
maturity,
Bunny,
they don't have none of that. Their brain is still developing. They're still learning the world. There's no way.
Yeah, it's like he described,
possible.
Reality versus fantasy,
Right,
and that's
so
what
her credentials went out the window when she made those first 2 comments about you can't utilize the penis as an indication, and you have to allow the baby
to form their own opinion.
You can't.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, you can't use science. Well, you can't use science, but this is the same people that tells us science made the vaccine.
And I understand that, like I said earlier, that common sense has taken a field trip for a while, but that's just going to the extreme. And the mass media and the radio stations, whatever, they're only making it worse because they're trying to convince all of us that what they're saying is
we're
true.
The problem.
We are
exactly. The normal ones are the weirdos.
Exactly.
The ones that believe in science-based facts. Right. We are the weirdos.
Like, in order to make America great again, what we need to do is go to the source, and we need to focus on the mental health problem. It's more of a crisis at this point in time, and it needs to be fixed, or at least in the process of being corrected to an extent, because if it keeps going on like this, it's only going to get worse. And
I would agree with that. I also would think that we have a men and women problem. Mm-hmm. We need to get back to the traditional roles of men and women.
Yeah.
Where this country flourished in some of those roles. Yes, there's still a difference because generationally, women do more outside the home today, but their roles as a mother, as a wife, as a caretaker, as a homemaker, those are very important roles, and it shouldn't be excluded from just because you want to change things up and make things more equal.
Well, that's what God designed us to do. We are the nurturers, and we are the ones that are to care for the family and our home life. The men are supposed to be the workers, to work out in the fields and then come home and be the providers of the family and the head of the household. As I stated earlier, women are the helpmeet of the men. So we are to help the men do and perform the tasks that they are meant to perform. We're not supposed to supersede that role and try to think that, try to feel like we're better or we can do this better than you. It's not about that.
Right.
It's nothing
not a
to do
competition.
with that. No, it's not.
Right. Yeah. So a lighthearted difference between man and woman, specifically I think between you and I have these discussions all the time because of our differences. When a woman says she's fine, what does that really mean?
She's not.
Okay, so can you expand on that?
Yeah. It means, if I say I'm fine, that means I'm extremely angry with you. I'm not fine. I need some space. Otherwise, I'm going to punch your lights out. But it's kind of our way of just saying, no, we're not okay, and we're not ready to deal with it right now. At least deal with it correctly. So just leave us alone until we have our emotions in check.
Yeah. Word of advice to all the men, single or in a relationship: when a woman says she's fine, you have about 5 seconds before you either need to decide that she is fine or you need to run.
Well, there's no deciding. You're going to find out the hard way either way if you stick around long enough.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add? Thoughts, hopes, prayers?
No, I have a lot of thoughts, but none of which probably
that might be for a future episode.
Yeah.
Well, if you haven't seen the documentary by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman? I encourage all of you to find it. There is a book too, I believe. His book is out, but also the movie is a very good documentary about the exposure he has for this culture of men can be women, women can be men, and gender is just a fluid thing that can be changed on a whim.
Well, it really opens your eyes to see exactly how bad
and how sick and evil
the mental illness problem is.
Yeah.
And just
as Glenn has said several times, with everything going on currently in the world, there's a lot of evil in this world.
Yeah.
This idea of gender and sex and idolatry of certain things that the left has done, I believe, is a distraction from some of the things that I'm going to get to in the next episode coming up that I think is more important that we should touch on rather than arguing about who is a girl or who's a boy. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me for my first guest appearance.
My pleasure.
I'm very thankful that you could come on and do this, even though we're right here in our home.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the conversation.
It jacks up the audience and getting another person on the microphone besides me. So thanks for having me as a witness to your testimony here, being a woman.
Of course.
I think that about wraps it up. We talked about what a woman is. I think we know what a woman is now after we've talked about it, right?
Yeah.
You know what a woman is. You know what a woman is not. So let's just end with this. A man is a man and a woman is a woman, and there's no discussion on whether or not that could be changed, no discussion on whether it could be done at birth or whenever. It is a feeling, a thought, a fantasy, whatever it is. Science and facts will always win out in the end.
No, the only person who can actually dictate that you are a male or a female is God, because he's the one that creates you to be either a male or a female. You cannot change it yourself, no matter how hard you try. Sorry to say that, but you are what you are, and just need to accept it and strive to, do your best as such.
I agree. I like that a lot. All right, gang. You can check out this podcast and all my episodes on my podcast at The Ryan Mack Show on Facebook and wherever you get your podcast. See y'all later.